Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about the New York Times. A few days ago, the Prime Minister of New Zealand was widely celebrated for having made the virus magically disappear. All she had to do was close the borders of New Zealand and destroy the livelihoods of 229,566 people in the tourist industry. In order to get rid of that evil virus, she destroyed the economy and also took away people's civil rights. New Zealand legislation, COVID-19 Public Health Response Bill. An enforcement officer may enter without a warrant any land, building, craft, vehicle, place, or thing if they have reasonable grounds to believe that a person is failing to comply with any aspect of a coronavirus order. But 2 days after declaring victory, the coronavirus came back. And now they're shipping off anyone with the virus and their families to quarantine centers. New Zealand now has about 40 active cases of coronavirus, and the Prime Minister has postponed their election, which was scheduled for September. She's pushed it back to October because she's pretty sure she can make the virus magically go away in another month. The New York Times thinks that postponing the election is a really good idea because the 40 people with coronavirus would make it impossible to campaign in a way that would ensure a free and fair election. Meanwhile, over in the United States, where we have 2.5 million active infections, President Trump talked about postponing the election here. After all, the Democratic Party nominee, Joe Biden, is too afraid to show up at his own national convention and probably also too afraid to show up for a debate. Obviously, under these conditions, it would be impossible to hold a free and fair election. If the New York Times thinks that 40 active cases in New Zealand is good reason to postpone an election, they should certainly think that 2.5 million cases in the United States would also be a good reason, particularly since the Democratic Party candidate has been hiding in his basement for most of the past 5 months. But the New York Times has a completely different opinion about the U.S. election than they do about the New Zealand election. They say that President Trump should be removed from office for trying to postpone the election. So we might ask why the New York Times thinks that 40 cases in New Zealand is good reason to postpone an election, but 2.5 million in the U.S. is not a good reason. Toto has a theory about the wild schizophrenia of the New York Times. Toto thinks that the New York Times wants people to be afraid during the U.S. election. Because if lots of people are afraid to go to the voting booth, then the Democrats can engage in massive mail-in voting fraud. Toto thinks that the New York Times isn't actually interested in free and fair elections in the United States. Their interest is to get a Democrat elected. The New York Times is pretty good at pulling the wool over people's eyes, but they're not so good at fooling Toto. You can visit them on the web at realclimatescience.com.